The Wind and a Boy, Bessie Head. Like all the village boys, Fredman had a long wind blowing for him, but perhaps the enchanted wind that blew for him filled the whole world with magic, until they became ordinary, dull, grown men who drank beer and made babies. The little village boys were a special set all on their own. They were kings whom no one ruled. They wandered where they willed from dawn to dusk, and only condescended to come home at dusk because they were afraid of the horrible things in the dark that might pounce on them. Unlike the little girls who adored household chores and drawing water, it was only now and then that the boys showed themselves as useful attachments to any household. When the first hard rains of summer fell, small dark shapes, quite naked except for their loincloths, sped out of the village into the bush. They knew that the first downpour had drowned all the wild rabbits, moles, and porcupines in their burrows in the earth. As they crouched down near the entrances to the burrows, they would see a small drowned nose of an animal peeping out. They knew it had struggled to emerge from its burrow, flooded by the sudden rush of storm water, and as they pulled out the animal, they would say pityingly, "Birds have more sense than rabbits, moles, and porcupines. They build their homes in trees." But it was hunting made easy, for no matter how hard a boy and his dog ran, a wild rabbit ran 10 times faster. A porcupine hurled his poisonous quills into the body, and a mole stayed where he thought it was safe, deep under the ground. So it was with inordinate pride that the boys carried home armfuls of dead animals for their families to feast on for many days. Apart from that, the boys lived very much as they pleased, with the wind and their own games. Now and then, the activities of a single family could captivate the imagination and hearts of all the people of their surroundings. For years and years, the combination of the boy Fredman and his grandmother Seyosenye made the people of Gasefi Mulemu ward smile, laugh, then cry. They smiled at his first 2 phases. Fredman came home as a small bundle from the hospital, a hospital his grandmother nursed carefully near her bosom and crooned to day and night with extravagant care and tenderness. "She is like that," people remarked, "because he may be the last child she will ever nurse. Seyosenye is old now and will die one of these days. The child is a gift to keep her heart warm." Indeed, all Seyosenye's children were grown, married, and had left home. Of all her children, only her last-born daughter was unmarried, and Fredman was the result of some casual mating she had indulged in a town hundreds of miles away where she had a job as a typist. She wanted to return to her job almost immediately, so she handed the child over to her mother, and that was that. She could afford to forget him, as he had a real mother now. During all the time that Seyosenye haunted the hospital awaiting her bundle, a friendly foreign doctor named Fredman took a fancy to her maternal grandmotherly ways. He made a habit of walking out of his path to talk to her. She never forgot it, and on receiving her bundle, she called the baby Fredman. They smiled at his second phase, a small dark shadow who toddled silently and gravely beside a very tall grandmother. Wherever the grandmother went, there went Fredman. Most women found this phase of the restless, troublesome toddler tedious. They dumped the toddler onto one of the younger girls and were off to weddings and visits on their own. "Why can't you leave your handbag at home sometimes, Granny?" they said. "Oh, he's no trouble," Seyosenye would reply. They began to laugh at his third phase. Almost overnight he turned into a tall, spindly-legged, graceful gazelle with large grave eyes. There was an odd musical lilt to his speech, and when he teased or was up to mischief, he moved his head on his long thin neck from side to side like a cobra. It was he who became the king of kings of all the boys in his area. He could turn his hand to anything and made the best wire cars with their wheels of shoe-polished tins. All his movements were neat, compact, decisive, and for his age he was a boy who knew his own mind. They laughed at his knowingness and certainty on all things, for he was like the grandmother, who had had a flaming youth all her own too. Seyosenye had scandalized the whole village in her days of good morals by leaving her own village ward to live with a married man in Gasefete Molemo ward. She had won him from his wife and married him, and then lived down the scandal in the way only natural queens can. Even in old age, she was still impressive. She sailed through the village, head in the air, with a quiet, almost expressionless face. She had developed large buttocks as time went by, and they announced her presence firmly in rhythm with her walk. Another of Seyosenye's certainties was that she was a woman who could plough, but it was like a special gift. Each season, in drought or hail or sun, she removed herself to her lands. She not only ploughed, but nursed and brooded over her crops. She was there all the time, till the corn ripened and the birds had to be chased off the land, till harvesting and threshing were done. So that even in drought years where there's scanty rain, she came home with some crops. She was the envy of all the women of the surroundings. Seyosenye always eats fine things in her house, they said. She ploughs and then sits down for many months and enjoys the fruit of her labor. The women also envied her beautiful grandson. There was something special there, so that even when Fredman moved into his bad phase, they forgave him crimes other boys received a sound thrashing for. The small boys were terrible thieves who harassed people by stealing their food money. It was all a part of the games they played, but one which people didn't like. Of them all, Fredman was the worst thief, so that his name was mentioned more and more in any thieving that had been uncovered. But Fredman showed us how to open the window with a knife and string, the sobbing, lashed boys would protest. Fredman isn't as bad as you, the parents would reply irrationally. They were hypnotized by a beautiful creature. The boy, Fredman, who had become a real nuisance by then, also walked around as though he was special. He couldn't possibly be a thief, and he added an aloof, offended, disdainful expression to his pretty face. He wasn't just an ordinary sort of boy in Gasefete Molemo ward. He was... It happened, quite accidentally, that his grandmother told him all those stories about the hunters, warriors, and emissaries of old. She was normally a quiet, absent-minded woman, given to dreaming by herself, but she liked to sing the boy a little song now and then as they sat by the outdoor fire. A lot of them were church songs and rather sad. They more or less passed as her bedtime prayer at night. She was one of the old churchgoers. Now and then she added a quaint little song to her repertoire, and as the nighttime firelight flames flickered between them, she never failed to note that this particular song was always well received by the boy. A little light would awaken in his eyes, and he would bend forward and listen attentively. "Welcome, Robinson Crusoe, welcome," she would sing in clear, sweet tones. "How could you stay so long away, Robinson? How could you do so?" When she was very young, Seyosenye had attended the mission school of the village for about a year, made a slight acquaintance with the ABC in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a little song about Robinson Crusoe. But girls didn't need an education in those days when ploughing and marriage made up their whole world. Yet Robinson Crusoe lived on as a gay and out-of-context memory of his school days. One evening the boy leaned forward and asked, "Is that a special praise song for Robinson Crusoe, grandmother?" "Oh, yes," she replied, smiling. "What great things did he do?" the boy asked pointedly. "They say he was a hunter who went by Gweta side and killed an elephant all by himself," she said, making up a story on the spot. Oh, in those days no man could kill an elephant by himself. All the regiments had to join together, and each man had to thrust his sword into the side of the elephant before it died. Well, Robinson Crusoe was gone many days, and people wondered about him. "Perhaps he has been eaten by a lion," they said. "Robinson likes to be a solitary person and do foolish things. We won't ever go out into the bush by ourselves because we know it is dangerous." Well, one day Robinson suddenly appeared in their midst, and people could see that he had a great thing on his mind. They all gathered around him. he said. I have killed an elephant for all the people. The people were surprised. Robinson, they said, it is impossible. How did you do that? The very thought of an elephant approaching the village makes us shiver. And Robinson said, oh, people, I saw a terrible sight. I was standing at the feet of the elephant. I was just a small ant. I could not see the world anymore. Elephant was above me until his very head touched the sky, and his ears spread out like great wings. He was very angry, but I only looked into one eye, which was turning round and round in anger. What to do now? I thought it better to put that eye out. I raised my spear and threw it at the angry eye. People, it went right inside. Elephant said not a word, and he fell to one side. Come, I will show you what I've done. Then the women cried in joy. They ran to fetch their containers, as some wanted the meat of the elephant, some wanted the fat. The men made their knives sharp. They would make shoes and many things from the skin and bones. There was something for all the people in the great work Robinson Crusoe did. All this while, as he listened to the story, the boy's eyes had glowed softly. At the end of it, he drew in a long breath. Grandmother, he whispered, adroitly stepping into the role of Robinson Crusoe, the great hunter. One day, I'm going to be like that. I'm going to be a hunter like Robinson Crusoe and bring meat to all the people. He paused for breath and then added tersely, and what other great thing did Robinson Crusoe do? Ah, she said, clicking her tongue in exhaustion. Am I then going away that I must tell all the stories at once? Although his image of Robinson Crusoe, the great hunter, was never to grow beyond his everyday boyish activities of pushing wire cars, hunting in the fields for wild rabbits, climbing trees to pull down old birds' nests, and yelling out in alarm to find that a small snake now occupied the abandoned abode, or racing against the wind with the spoils of his latest theft, the stories awakened a great tenderness in him. If Robinson Crusoe was not churning up the dust in deadly hand-to-hand combat with an enemy, he was crossing swollen rivers and wild jungles as the great messenger and ambassador of the chief. All his activities were touchingly in aid of or in defense of the people. One day, Fredman expressed this awakened compassion for life in a strange way. After a particularly violent storm, people found their huts invaded by many small mice, and they were hard-pressed to rid themselves of these pests. So Yosenye ordered Fredman to kill the mice. But grandmother, he protested, they have come to us for shelter. They lost their homes in the storm. It's better that I put them in a box and carry them out into the fields again once the rains are over. She had laughed in surprise at this and spread the story around among her women friends, who smiled tenderly, then said to their own offspring, Fredman isn't as bad as you. Life and its responsibilities began to weigh down heavily on Fredman as he approached his 14th year. Less time was spent in boyish activities. He grew more and more devoted to his grandmother and concerned to assist her in every way. He wanted a bicycle so that he might run up and down to the shops for her, deliver messages, or do any other chore she might have in mind. His mother, who worked in a town far away, sent him the money to purchase the bicycle. The gift brought the story of his life abruptly to a close. Towards the beginning of the rainy season, he accompanied his grandmother to her lands, which were some 20 miles outside the village. They sowed seed together after the hired tractor had turned up the land, but the boy's main chore was to keep the household pot filled with meat. Sometimes they ate birds Fredman had trapped. Sometimes they ate fried tortoise meat or wild rabbit. But there was always something, as the bush abounded with animal life. So Yosenye only had to take a bag of mealie meal, packets of sugar, tea, and powdered milk as provisions for their stay at the lands. Meat was never a problem. Midway through the ploughing season, she began to run out of sugar, tea, and milk. Fredman, she said that evening, I shall wake you early tomorrow morning. You will have to take the bicycle into the village and purchase some more sugar, tea, and milk. He was up at dawn with the birds, a solitary figure cycling on a pathway through the empty bush. By 9, he had reached the village and first made his way to Gasefete Molemo Ward and the yard of a friend of his grandmother, who gave him a cup of tea and a plate of porridge. Then he put one foot on the bicycle and turned to smile at the woman with his beautiful gazelle eyes. His smile was to linger vividly before her for many days, as a short while later, heart-pounding feet came running into her yard and reported that Fredman was dead. He pushed the bicycle through the winding, sandy pathway of the village ward, reached the high embankment of the main road, pedalled vigorously up it, and out of the corner of his eye saw a small green truck speeding towards him. In the devil-may-care fashion of all the small boys, he cycled right into its path, turned his head, and smiled appealingly at the driver. The truck caught him on the front bumper, squashed the bicycle, and dragged the boy along at a crazy speed for another 100 yards, dropped him, and careered on another 20 yards before coming to a halt. The boy's pretty face was a smear all along the road, and he only had a torso left. People of Khasafete Molemo ward never forgot the last coherent words Seosenye spoke to the police. A number of them climbed into the police truck and accompanied it to her lands. They saw her walk slowly and inquiringly towards the truck. They heard the matter-of-fact voice of the policeman announce his death. Then they heard Seosenye say piteously, "Can't you return those words back?" She turned away from them, either to collect her wits or the few possessions she had brought with her. Her feet and buttocks quivered anxiously as she stumbled towards her hut. Then her feet tripped her up, and she fell to the ground like a stunned log. The people of Khasafete Molemo ward buried the boy Fredman, but none of them would go near the hospital where Seosenye lay. The stories brought to them by way of the nurses were too terrible for words. They say the old woman sang and laughed and talked to herself all the time. So they merely asked each other, "Have you been to see Ma Seosenye?" "I'm afraid I cannot. It would kill my heart." 2 weeks later, they buried her. As was the village habit, the incident was discussed thoroughly from all sides till it was understood. In this timeless, sleepy village, the goats stewed and suckled their young ones on the main road, or lay down and took their afternoon naps there. The motorists either stopped for them or gave way, but it appeared that the driver of the truck had neither brakes on his car nor a driving license. He belonged to a new rich civil servant class whose salaries had become fantastically high since independence. They had to have cars in keeping with their new status. They had to have any car as long as it was a car. They were in such a hurry about everything that they couldn't be bothered to take driving lessons. And thus progress, development, and preoccupation with status and living standards first announced themselves to the village. It looked like being an ugly story with many decapitated bodies on the main road.